Welcome back to Key to Learn English, the podcast where we don't just teach you vocabulary, we show you how to wield it. How to take the language you already have and make it work harder, more precisely, more expressively. I'm Sarah, joined as always by Ryan. And today's episode genuinely excites me.
Likewise, because we're tackling something deceptively simple. Describing your day in English. And I say deceptively simple because on the surface it sounds trivial. But the moment you attempt it with any real nuance, you realize just how much of the language you're leaving on the table.
Exactly. Most learners at B2 and above already have the grammar. What they lack is expressive range, the idioms, the emotional vocabulary, the turns of phrase that separate functional English from genuinely fluent English. And that is precisely what we're unpacking today.
We're essentially staging an intervention for the word fine. It's been doing the heavy lifting for far too long, and today it gets a well-deserved retirement.
Entirely overdue. So, Ryan, since we're talking about real days, walk us through yours. The unfiltered version, please.
Full disclosure, last night I did everything by the book. Reasonable bedtime, no screens, the whole ritual. And yet I found myself lying there completely wide awake, my mind refusing to disengage.
Ah, the cruel irony of the overactive mind. Your body is horizontal, your eyes are shut, and yet your brain has convened an emergency committee to review every unresolved matter from the past 6 months, complete with a comprehensive agenda.
Precisely. I was tossing and turning for what felt like hours, that relentless cycle of left side, right side, blanket on, blanket off, check the time, bitterly regret checking the time, and repeat.
The regret of checking the time is its own particular torment, isn't it? Suddenly, you're not just sleep-deprived, you're doing arithmetic. If I fall asleep within the next 8 minutes, I can still salvage 5 hours and 43 minutes.
And of course, the more desperately you will yourself to sleep, the more elusive it becomes. There's a saying I encountered once. Sleep is like a shy cat. The harder you pursue it, the faster it retreats.
That's a painfully accurate metaphor. So, by the time morning arrived, you were already operating on fumes before the day had even gained traction.
My eyes opened, but the rest of me hadn't quite ratified that decision. Then the alarm went off, I silenced it, closed my eyes for what I genuinely believed was a single second, and very nearly dozed off again.
The perilous just one more minute. The greatest lie we tell ourselves. That minute has a remarkable talent for expanding into 20 without any warning whatsoever.
A genuine mystery of physics. So I surfaced from sleep feeling thoroughly on edge. That low-grade tension where nothing is catastrophically wrong, but everything feels slightly too loud, slightly too slow, slightly too much. Even my shirt seemed to be personally antagonizing me.
Your shirt was entirely blameless, Ryan. But that's exactly the distinction we want to draw. Rather than defaulting to, my morning was rough, you're conveying the texture of that roughness, the specific, relatable quality of it. And that is what makes English come alive at this level.
Which is to say, to be honest, I tossed and turned all night, barely avoided dozing off after my alarm, and spent the morning feeling decidedly on edge. That's not more complicated, it's just more honest, and infinitely more compelling.
Those 3 phrases, tossed and turned, dozed off, on edge, are going straight into the word tour. Keep them in mind as we go. Now, Ryan's morning involves a certain amount of involuntary drama. Mine tends to be more premeditated, though not necessarily smoother. Some mornings I'm running the mental marathon before I've even thrown back the duvet.
The body is still horizontal, but the brain has already clocked in, pulled up its inbox, and started drafting responses to emails that haven't even been sent yet.
Disturbingly accurate. I'm mentally rehearsing conversations, recalibrating priorities, compiling my to-do list, all before my feet have touched the floor. So I've become quite deliberate about creating a buffer zone in the morning. 10 seconds, no phone, no notifications. A conscious pause before I re-enter the stream.
That's a deceptively powerful intervention, because the moment you pick up the phone, you've effectively handed the agenda of your entire morning over to everyone else's priorities.
Entirely. And that pause, that small act of resistance, is what allows me to feel genuinely at ease as I begin the day. Not serene in some idealized way, but grounded, present, like I've chosen to be there rather than been dragged into it.
I, on the other hand, used to lunge for my phone the instant I regained consciousness, and invariably I'd zone out completely, lose all track of time, and find myself in a frantic scramble to get out the door. Entirely self-inflicted, entirely predictable, and entirely repeated the following morning.
So you've managed to break that cycle?
With varying degrees of success. My general framework is that the first coffee is sacrosanct. No screens, no agenda. The second coffee is when I actually knuckle down and engage with the day in earnest. The second coffee is, frankly, non-negotiable.
The second coffee as a psychological threshold. I have enormous respect for that. But here's the broader principle for our listeners. When articulating your morning in English, resist the urge to simply inventory your actions. Instead, describe the quality of your entry into the day. Did you ease in, or were you plunged straight into the deep end?
I eased into the morning versus I hit the ground running. These phrases don't merely report facts, they evoke experience. And that's the register we're cultivating at B2 and above.
The difference between recounting your morning and actually communicating it. That's what elevates the language.
Work. Because this is where vague descriptors really start to collapse under their own weight. My day was busy is perhaps the most information-poor sentence in the English language.
It tells us absolutely nothing. Busy is the baseline of modern existence. What we want to know is the nature of that busyness. Productive? Chaotic? The particular variety where you're completely swamped and yet somehow accomplishing nothing of substance?
Swamped. Now there's a word that actually captures it. That sensation of being submerged by competing demands, where messages, meetings, and minor crises arrive simultaneously, and your prefrontal cortex is quietly filing a formal complaint about working conditions.
To which management remains entirely unresponsive.
Perpetually. And what compounds it is the proliferation of manufactured urgency. You finally carve out 15 minutes of uninterrupted concentration, and out of nowhere, something lands in your inbox flagged urgent. Then another. Then a last-minute rescheduling notification that is, inexplicably, also urgent.
The uninvited guest who doesn't knock, doesn't leave, and brings several friends. What I've found is that when I'm genuinely swamped, my instinct is to attempt everything in parallel, which means I'm perpetually context switching, perpetually half-focused, and perpetually finishing nothing. I feel productive in the way that a spinning top looks purposeful.
That's a sharp distinction, the performance of productivity versus actual productivity. And the antidote, at least for me, is the deliberate decision to knuckle down on a single priority. Close the peripheral tabs, silence the notifications, and give one thing my complete and undivided attention.
And somewhere in the background, a perfectly good coffee has gone stone cold and is quietly mourning its own existence.
Without fail, cold coffee is the universal hallmark of a genuinely swamped morning. But looking back on those mornings, there's often a quiet satisfaction in having navigated them with some competence. You didn't spiral. You triaged, you focused, you delivered. That deserves articulation.
And now you have the language for it. Rather than work was hectic, try I was completely swamped from the outset, but I knuckled down, prioritized ruthlessly, and got through what actually mattered. Pressure, agency, and resolution, all in one breath.
Economy of expression with genuine emotional weight. That's the B2 to C2 sweet spot right there.
The afternoon. The part of the day that tends to be conspicuously absent from anyone's highlight reel.
2 o'clock, the circadian nadir. What I've come to think of as the post-lunch fog, that particular brand of cognitive lethargy where your body is physically present at your desk, but your brain has essentially handed in its notice.
The eyes are open, the screen is technically in view, and yet the mind is somewhere else entirely. Possibly filing paperwork in some quieter, less demanding dimension of existence.
My capacity for sustained concentration just evaporates around that time. Someone could be delivering genuinely critical information, and my brain simply dims. It's not exhaustion in any dramatic sense. It's more like a gentle, involuntary dimming of the lights.
Your brain, apparently, has no concept of professional obligation whatsoever. Mine manifests differently. Less drowsiness, more what I describe as cognitive congestion. The accumulated weight of the morning's decisions, interactions, and unresolved threads just sitting there, occupying bandwidth. Processing anything new becomes genuinely effortful.
That's a precise description. Cognitive congestion. Like your mental RAM is maxed out, and everything starts lagging simultaneously.
Exactly. And the mistake I used to make was powering through regardless, treating the afternoon fog as a weakness to be overcome rather than a signal to be heeded. The consequence was that by evening, I was running on empty, and at night, I couldn't sleep because my mind had never been given any genuine opportunity to decompress.
Which is the paradox people rarely appreciate. The inability to wind down at night is often a direct consequence of having denied yourself genuine rest during the day. The nervous system doesn't forget, it simply defers the reckoning.
Rest is not a concession, it's a strategy. I may have that engraved somewhere visible.
I'd have it laminated and mounted above my desk. And critically, we're not talking about 45 minutes of passive scrolling, which tends to leave you feeling more depleted than before. We mean genuine cognitive disengagement, a walk, a proper cup of tea, staring out a window without any agenda, something that signals to your nervous system, you are temporarily off the clock.
So instead of afternoon was fine, consider by mid-afternoon I was completely running on empty, so I took a much-needed break. And the difference in my focus and clarity afterwards was quite striking. That's not an excuse. That's self-awareness. And at this level, self-awareness sounds deeply sophisticated.
Fine simply cannot carry that kind of freight. It never could.
The evening, the closing chapter, and arguably the most underrated part of the day, in terms of its downstream influence on everything that follows.
Most people conceive of the evening as simply the absence of work. The day ends, and recovery begins automatically. But that's rarely how it functions in practice, is it? The quality of your evening has a direct bearing on the quality of the following morning.
On a good evening, there's genuine decompression. I take a walk, put on music I actually enjoy, and gradually feel myself shedding the day. The professional persona dissolving, and the actual person slowly re-emerging.
Reconnecting with yourself after a day of performing competence for other people. That's a lovely way to frame it.
But on other evenings, particularly after a demanding day, my body leaves the office while my mind very much does not. I'm replaying conversations, second-guessing decisions, mentally drafting the email I should have sent at 3 in the afternoon. The physical location shifts. The psychological one remains stubbornly in place.
The 11 o'clock email revelation. Every professional's nemesis. What's helped you actually disengage when the day has been particularly relentless?
Rituals mostly. Small, deliberate ones. A few minutes of proper stretching. Not as a fitness exercise, but as a physical signal of transition. A meal eaten without a screen in sight. Music that has no associations with work whatsoever. And occasionally, just sitting in silence without any agenda, which sounds straightforward, but is genuinely quite difficult to sustain.
Doing nothing with genuine intention is, paradoxically, one of the harder skills to cultivate. We're so thoroughly conditioned to equate stillness with unproductivity that it requires a conscious act of will to simply be present without optimizing anything.
We need to give ourselves explicit permission to stop performing and simply exist for a while. There's also something to be said for a physical reset. Changing out of work clothes is a surprisingly potent psychological cue. The environment shifts, the body shifts, and eventually the mind follows suit.
Creating a clear boundary between modes of being. And when that transition is handled with some deliberateness, the evening stops being merely the tail end of the day and becomes the beginning of genuine restoration.
Which brings us full circle. Because describing your day with this kind of depth, this level of self-reflection and expressive precision, is itself a form of processing. You're not just recounting events. You're making sense of your own experience in English. And that is the ultimate aim.
Not, I worked, I ate, I slept, but, to be honest, I felt on edge from the moment I woke up, found myself completely swamped by mid-morning, but I knuckled down, took a much-needed break in the afternoon, and by evening had finally managed to feel genuinely at ease. One arc, one authentic account, told with precision.
That is B2 to C2 English at its most natural and most powerful. Before the word tour, let's equip you with something immediately deployable: conversation openers. Because at this level, the challenge often isn't having something to say. It's knowing how to frame your entry into the conversation with enough sophistication to signal that something substantive is coming.
Think of these as rhetorical hinges, the phrases that swing the door open and invite the listener in. They establish the register of your answer before a single substantive word has been spoken.
The first, to be honest. Your signal that you're offering the unvarnished truth rather than the socially acceptable version. To be honest, the morning was a write-off, but the afternoon more than redeemed itself. It conveys candor and self-awareness simultaneously.
Next, funnily enough, deploy this when the day defied your expectations, or when there's an ironic dimension worth surfacing. Funnily enough, the meeting I'd been quietly dreading turned out to be the most productive conversation of the entire week. Creates immediate narrative intrigue.
Then, out of nowhere, your device for introducing sudden reversals or unexpected developments. Out of nowhere, The entire project scope was revised at 4 in the afternoon. The listener is instantly invested in what comes next.
And looking back on it, your reflective mode. It signals that you've had time to evaluate, to process, to extract meaning from the experience. Looking back on it, I think the pressure actually sharpened my focus in a way I hadn't anticipated. Measured, introspective, and distinctly sophisticated.
Finally, all in all, your evaluative summary. The phrase that signals a considered close. All in all, it was the kind of day that exhausts you, but also quietly reminds you what you're capable of. It lends the answer weight and resolution.
Shall we road test them? Sarah, go ahead.
With pleasure. Ryan, how was your day?
To be honest, it got off to a fairly rocky start, but I managed to salvage something genuinely meaningful from the wreckage by mid-afternoon.
Excellent. Now, funnily enough,
The task I'd been procrastinating on for the better part of a week turned out to take about 20 minutes once I actually committed to it.
and looking back on it,
Looking back on it, I think I handled the ambiguity of the situation considerably more deftly than I might have done a year ago, which is, quietly, an encouraging realization.
notice that none of those answers were particularly long, but each carried genuine texture, emotional intelligence, and a sense of a person actually reflecting rather than merely reporting. That is the register we're cultivating. Word tour. 8 phrases from today, delivered with the depth and context that will actually make them stick. You don't need all 8 immediately. Find the 2 or 3 that resonate with your own experience and begin there.
Phrase 1. To toss and turn. This describes restless, fragmented sleep, the physical manifestation of a mind that refuses to settle. I tossed and turned for most of the night, so by morning I was already running on fumes. Vivid, relatable, and instantly understood.
Phrase 2. To doze off. To fall asleep unintentionally, often briefly, and at a deeply inopportune moment. I nearly dozed off during the briefing, which would have been quite difficult to explain. It implies a loss of voluntary control, more nuanced and more interesting than simply falling asleep.
Phrase 3. On edge. A state of low-level tension. Not acute distress, but that ambient unease where your tolerance is diminished and your reactions are mildly disproportionate to their triggers. I was on edge all morning. The slightest disruption felt like a significant imposition. Psychologically precise and widely relatable.
Phrase 4. At ease. Its elegant counterpart. To feel settled, comfortable, and free from the undercurrent of anxiety that tends to characterize our days. After an hour away from my desk, I finally felt genuinely at ease, present rather than merely functional. The word finally does considerable work in that sentence.
Phrase 5. Swamped. To be overwhelmed by sheer volume, an excess of competing demands arriving faster than you can meaningfully address them. By 10 o'clock, I was completely swamped, fielding requests from 3 different directions simultaneously. Considerably more expressive than busy, it implies submersion rather than mere occupation.
Phrase 6. Out of nowhere. Used to signal the abrupt, unannounced arrival of something disruptive. Out of nowhere, the timeline was compressed by 48 hours, which rather restructured my entire afternoon. It lends your account the quality of a narrative with genuine stakes.
Phrase 7. To knuckle down. to make a deliberate, disciplined commitment to focused effort, particularly after a period of distraction or avoidance. I had to knuckle down and block out everything peripheral just to get the thing finished. It implies agency and resolve. You're not merely working, you're choosing to prioritize.
And phrase 8, a much-needed break. A pause that was not merely pleasant, but genuinely necessary, restorative rather than indulgent. I took a much-needed break around 3, and the cognitive clarity I felt afterwards was quite striking. The phrase carries an implicit acknowledgement that you had been operating beyond your sustainable capacity.
To demonstrate how fluidly these combine, to be honest, I tossed and turned the night before, arrived at work already on edge, found myself completely swamped within the first hour, but I knuckled down, took a much-needed break mid-afternoon, and by evening, I was finally at ease. A coherent emotional arc, in one sentence, using language that is precise, idiomatic, and entirely natural.
That is the standard, not performance, precision. And the more you practice it, the more instinctive it becomes, which is the definition of genuine fluency. And now, the listener comment challenge. This is where the learning becomes real, because passive comprehension and active production are very different cognitive demands. Leave a comment below and tell us how your day actually was, with at least one phrase from today's episode woven in naturally.
Something along the lines of, "To be honest, I was completely swamped this morning, but I knuckled down and managed to get through the most pressing things." Or, "Funnily enough, the day I'd been quietly dreading turned out to be surprisingly manageable. All in all, I finally feel at ease."
Your English doesn't need to be flawless before you put it into the world. The act of committing your thoughts to the page, in English, with genuine intention, is the practice. Proficiency is built in the doing, not in waiting until you feel sufficiently prepared.
And every comment you write is authentic output, real communication rather than drilling exercises in isolation. That distinction matters enormously for long-term fluency. You're not rehearsing English, you're actually using it.
We read every single one, and we find them genuinely illuminating. Your daily lives, rendered in English with increasing confidence, nuance, and expressiveness. It's a remarkable thing to witness.
And that brings us to the close of today's episode. If I had to distill the takeaway, your day does not need to have been extraordinary to be worth articulating with care. It requires one honest observation, one emotional detail, one moment of genuine reflection, and suddenly, you're not merely reporting facts, you're communicating. And that distinction is everything.
This week's challenge. The next time someone asks how your day was, resist the gravitational pull of fine. Offer one phrase from today, one specific detail, one authentic moment. That's the entire assignment, and it is more than enough.
Fine has served us faithfully for years. It has earned its retirement with full honors.
If today's episode added something to your English, a phrase, a perspective, a new way of thinking about expression, please do like, subscribe, and share it with another learner who is ready to move beyond the surface. Every share genuinely helps this community grow.
Take care of your English, and take care of yourselves. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Sarah. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, speak honestly, speak precisely, and speak with confidence. Bye for now.